Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this May 26, 2014, Memorial Day in the United States edition of Nightcast. Our opening story tonight, the European elections. Far-right victory divides France.
For the far-right Front National, it was a night of clinking glasses and celebrations. Afterwards, party leader Marine Le Pen went to a bar with family and friends. But her victory left France and much of Europe in shock. After holding a crisis meeting with his ministers, President Hollande addressed the French people tonight and said Europe had become too remote and incomprehensible.
Europe must be simple, clear, to be effective where it is needed and withdraw where it is not necessary.
Marine Le Pen's victory has left France divided.
If she's polled 25%, that means that there is a need, so let's give her a chance.
Everything with that which is unpleasant is attributed to Europe, so it's necessarily leading the people to vote for the extremes.
It wasn't just here in France that anti-establishment parties topped the poll. It happened also in Greece, but there the party came from the radical left, and the issue, 5 years of austerity. So in Greece, victory belonged to a radical left party which opposed cuts made in exchange for bailouts. Its leader, Alexis Tsipras, said the whole of Europe was watching Greece because it had resisted austerity. In Spain, the two mainstream parties each lost a third of their European seats. A new left-wing party, born out of street protests against cuts and inequality, unexpectedly won 5 seats.
The main message I want to send to Europe is that we don't want to be a German colony. We don't want to be a colony of the European Troika. We don't want our young to serve beers and tapas to the rich of Northern Europe. We don't want to provide cheap labour. We don't want to simply hand over our country's industry. We want a sovereign country with dignity and with a future.
Across Europe, it is mainly the anti-establishment and Eurosceptic parties that have made the big gains.
The good performance of the populists and the right is both remarkable and regrettable. But now it is about winning back voters. That is also true for France.
Marine Le Pen has shaken French and European politics, but still a majority of members of the European Parliament will come from mainstream parties that back further European integration.
Following the voting in Europe, friends, the French President Francois Hollande went on television to say the Eurosceptic vote must be confronted.
But it is in France, a founding member of the European Union, the home of human rights, the country of liberties, that the extreme right wins with such a big margin. Of course, this vote doesn't negate all the votes that were cast for the pro-European parties. But this vote is there, and it has to be confronted. It's what I'm doing.
And friends, likewise, Angela Merkel felt the far-right EU success was regrettable.
The
success of the populists and the far right is remarkable and regrettable. Now it is up to us to win back voters here and especially in France. I believe that a path directed at competition, growth and jobs is the best answer for the disappointed voters who cast their ballots in a way we did not wish for.
And friends, in Italy, Italy's center-left Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has won a substantial victory in the European elections, one of the few positive results for pro-European parties.
Matteo Renzi is one of the youngest and least experienced leaders that Italy has ever had. He's only been in power a few months. He manoeuvred his way into the prime ministerial palace by means of an internal party coup. There was no election, he had no mandate, but he won one tonight. His pro-Europe Democratic Party scored a large and important victory. Mr. Renzi will see that as an endorsement of his sweeping plans for economic and political reform of Italy. The Eurosceptic 5-star movement mounted a vigorous campaign. Again and again it filled the piazzas with tens of thousands of supporters, and it managed to push Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia into a poor third place. But the 5-star activists fell far short of the victory that their leadership promised. Instead, the night belonged to the young reforming Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who remains a believer in the European dream.
And friends, I know we've had one report already on what happened in France with the elections, the European elections. The outcome means a greater say for those who want to cut back the EU powers or abolish it completely. But EU supporters will be pleased that election turnout was slightly higher. Now, I have a video report with Chris Morris that shows what the French Prime Minister, he called the elections to the European Parliament that finished last night. He called it a political earthquake, and there's some details in this that I think will just be good for us to be aware of and know about.
In a country that has always been right at the heart of the European idea, she won. Marine Le Pen's campaign was anti-EU, anti-immigration, anti-globalization, and it struck a chord.
This evening I thank the French people. The sovereign people have spoken clearly, like in all great moments of our history, against all those who no longer believed in France. The sovereign French people say they want to take their destiny into their own hands.
As results came in through the night, the picture was mixed. The populist anti-EU right also did well in Denmark, but not in the Netherlands. While in Germany, mainstream parties won the day. Pro-European MEPs will be the dominant force in the next European Parliament. There will be real extremists there too, like the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn in Greece. But the winners in Greece were not from the far right, but from the anti-austerity radical left, a different anti-establishment vote. The Syriza leader Alexis Tsipras spoke of an historic day for the left, despite what he called the unprecedented propaganda of fear. It could make for a more lively, more rumbustious European Parliament. One thing is important to remember. Anti-establishment doesn't necessarily mean anti-EU. Parties such as Syriza in Greece want the EU to do more, not less, to help their countries. But there will be plenty of opposition here to politics as usual, and mainstream parties would do well to take that on board. It is likely that they will, but to what extent? Many still want to forge ahead with closer integration.
I think now the mainstream parties, they're going to have to address the accountability of Brussels. They're going to start to address having to roll powers back, hand powers back to national capitals. And they're going to start to have to think about what do they do about the free movement of people. The mainstream parties on the centre-right are going to have to respond to the demands of those radical right parties all across Europe.
That could mean a chance for those like David Cameron who want to reform the EU. But alliances have to be forged here, and no one will have it all their own way. Chris Morris, BBC News, Brussels.
Friends, we have one more report on how the elections for the members of the European Parliament, how it impacts the UK. That report coming up in a moment. I just want to let you know before we go to that, with William Hague speaking, that we do have video on Pope Francis' visit in Israel today, the last day of his 3-day tour in the Middle East. He was in Israel today. Went to the Wailing Wall. I have that coming up for you next. Foreign Secretary William Hague says the Conservatives are best placed to fix Britain's relationship with the European Union despite a surge in support for the UKIP. Speaking to David Dimsby, Mr. Hague said that his party was committed to an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the EU.
I think people do know that in the European elections, as UKIP put it to them, they can have a free hit, they can have a vote that doesn't have the consequence of bringing the wrong government in this country. So it is very different from a general election. But of course, we will respond by making clear that we can fix the relationship between Britain and Europe, that we can deliver real change and give people a say in a referendum. And only the Conservative Party can do that. And that, of course, is what we have to make clear from now to the next general election.
But you've been saying that. But it's not convincing people, is it? Otherwise they wouldn't have gone for Nigel Farage.
Well, people are entirely capable of voting different ways in different elections, as we know. We are seeing this just in this last few days. Local election results are different from European election results. So people use different elections to deliver different messages. And certainly, as I say, there is a message across Europe of disillusionment with Europe, and the EU has got to hear that loud and clear. Now, as to how people vote in a general election, that, of course, will be determined over the next year. But in that election, it will be only the Conservative Party that can give people a choice on Europe. Labour and the Liberal Democrats won't do so, don't want to do so. UKIP would not be able to do so. It is only David Cameron and the Conservatives who can do that, and we are committed to an in-out referendum where people can make their decision.
Pope Francis has visited the most important holy sites, according to our news lead here, for Muslims and Jews in Jerusalem's Old City on the final day of his Middle East tour. At the end of this video, friends, I'll tell you how one of the most holy place for the Muslims. When I was in Israel and went hiking up the mountain to see that, I was confronted by security guards that told me if I didn't turn around and go back down, not only would I be arrested, but that it was a capital offense for a Christian to come upon those grounds, and that I could be put to death for it. And yeah, but here's Quentin Somerville with a report on the Pope's visit, where he got to go where I would have been put to death if I had gone.
The final day of the Pope's visit to the Holy Land, and this was Israel's day. He visited its most sacred places, including here, the Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem. Pope Francis placed a wreath on the crypt. Within lie the ashes of some of those who perished in Nazi extermination camps.
Mai più, Signore. Mai più.
Never again, Lord, never again, said the Pope. As Israel's Prime Minister and President looked on, he denounced the Nazi genocide. It was, he said, an unfathomable abyss. Earlier, the Pope visited the Western Wall, one of Judaism's most holy places. Like millions of others, the Pope left here a message for God. It was written in Spanish, the prayer, Our Father. The Pope has placed his prayer in a gap in the Western Wall. He's visiting today Judaism and Israel's most holiest and sacred places. But that image, today's image, of a solitary figure standing and praying by a wall has already been overshadowed. This will be the abiding image of the Pope's trip, one that has thrilled Palestinians and infuriated some Israelis. The Vatican said this tour was about religion, but politics here is unavoidable.
He knew full well, and we all knew full well that there were going to be political angles and that all sides will try to make political capital out of it.
The Pope has thrown himself into this trip and into one of the world's most difficult problems, Middle East peace. With that, he may not achieve much, but here at least he's left a deep impression with Christians, Jews and Muslims alike. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Friends, that place I was telling you that I was hiking up to that I did not get to go into or see was the Dome of the Rock. Westerners are not allowed to go there. The Arabs, that's taboo. But the Pope, the Arabs, they're now calling Pope Francis their hope pope. He's put a lot of hope in them that he's going to help them secure some of that land of Israel, and they want their land back. But, the last time the Pope in history, not this one, but a former Pope, was involved with the Arabs, he made a deal with them, and he helped them get into Jerusalem, and part of the deal was the Pope was supposed to wind up with a piece of Jerusalem, but it went off so well for the Arabs and the Arab generals. They pulled it off so well. We're talking 400 or 500 years ago that they built their Dome of the Rock and they told the Pope to take a hike. Now, that was back then. Now, this Pope has a little more power. He has the power and backup and unseen support of the God of this world. And the God of this world who knows he has but a short time left and is angry and is stirred up and is going to do everything he can from here on out to accelerate the way things go. And let me before I go to our next story, now let's go to, I tell you what, I need my slides in a different order. So let's take a look at what Jeremy Bowen has put together with an interview with a Holocaust survivor.
I'm at Yad Vashem, which is Israel's Holocaust memorial, where the Pope, like all visiting leaders pretty much who come to this country, is going to be paying his respects to the 6 million Jews who were killed by the Nazis during the Second World War. And I'm joined now here at Yad Vashem by a Holocaust survivor, Joe Goddenker. And tell me your story, Joe. You were born in 1942 in Poland.
Yes, my father was already in concentration camp, and my mother, who had false ID, she was very Aryan-looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, gave birth to me in a convent hospital.
And what happened to your father?
My father survived, and he was liberated in Germany. My mother survived and came back and got me.
The Pope's here today. Over the years, the Catholic Church and Jewish religion have not always had very good relations. There's a controversy about the Pope who was there during the war and whether he not only could have done more, but whether he actually collaborated in some way with the Holocaust. What is your view of the presence of the Pope here and of the relations between Jews and Catholics?
Well, let me preface that by saying that my wife is Catholic, and not a super devout, but a practicing Catholic. And I still have that feeling of the relationship where I was I was saved by Catholic people. I was brought up as a Catholic. As a matter of fact, the title of one of the stories in one of the papers in Toronto was "Brought Up Catholic So He Could Survive as a Jew."
Okay, friends, we're going to come on out of that report. And I was mentioning to you a Holocaust survivor. That leads well into where we were talking about where are we now in prophecy. We are, if we put our slide up on the screen, bring it forward, the first 4 seals of the 7 seals of Revelation have been active since Jesus Christ's time. We've had deceivers. That's depicted by the first seal, Revelation depicting it as a white horse, which Jesus Christ described as being a horse of deception. People will say that Christ came and even use his name, but they'll still deceive many. The second seal, the red horse wars, rumors of wars, we've had those, and in the last century we've had 2 rounds of world war, and we have a 3rd round of world war yet to come up. The 3rd and 4th seal, the black horse of famine and the pale horse of disease epidemics, seismic activity, and terike, trouble. Not the trouble of the Great Tribulation, but trouble. Trouble that leads to the Great Tribulation. And the Great Tribulation was mentioned by Jesus Christ in verse 21 of Matthew 24, where Christ said, "For then shall be great tribulation," and he described it as a time that was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Christ announced this time as the worst time in history, the time of Jacob's trouble. If we go back to those to the chart for a moment, it's the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation. It's a time of martyrdom of God's saints like has never happened before. It's the time of World War III. It's a time of the revived Holy Roman Empire. And whether it's this pope or another pope, one of the popes, the end-time pope, will put the crown on the head of the new emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. It'll be a coronation ceremony in Frankfurt, Germany, the present home of the European Central Bank, also the home or the place where the Emperor's Hall is located. I've told you before how the Emperor's Hall was destroyed by Allied bombers at the end of World War II. But then the United States, through the Marshall Plan, rebuilt the Emperor's Hall to the same architectural specifications as the original. Only they did it a little more modern. It's a finer building now, and it's the building in which the end time, the seventh head, the final head of the Holy Roman Empire, which the Bible calls a beast, where that coronation ceremony with the Pope present conducting it will take place and is yet to take place. As Revelation 17 verse 10 says, that a prophecy written for the end time, that a prophecy that came alive in 1936 when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia and made the announcement that he had revived the Holy Roman Empire. Let's bring that slide up for a moment. Let's see if I can get down. I got to rearrange my shot so I can get to this easier, so we can get down to the bottom shot down here, where the sixth head was the time of this prophecy in Revelation 17 that said, "One is, and one is yet to come." And God opened up the understanding of his end-time apostle. In one way, you could call him a prophet, except he himself said, "I'm not a prophet in the sense that I write scripture of prophecy. I go by what's already been written." And what was already written by God through the disciple apostle John in the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 10, was this prophecy that says, "One is, and one is yet to come." And God opened up the understanding so that Mr. Armstrong could understand the one that is was the sixth head of the Holy Roman Empire that had been revived through Mussolini in 1936, and it lasted until 1945 when Mussolini died, and I believe it was April 28 in 1945. That put the Holy Roman Empire back into the pit, back into the abyss. And that left us with that prophecy saying, "One is, and one is yet to come." Now, this prophecy we're in the middle of this prophecy, because the one that is presently is not. When Mussolini died in 1945, that enabled Mr. Armstrong to identify where we were, that the sixth head had come up, been revived, went back into the abyss. And so now we're waiting for this one yet to come, the one you see in the bottom column that says seventh head. This will be the final head that has 10 horns to come up out of that pit. Now, the Great Tribulation is the next major event in world prophecy, And we were just on a scripture where Jesus Christ had said, let me put that slide back up, where Jesus Christ had said, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." So it's a time so bad, nothing has ever been as bad as what's going to come, and so bad that thankfully it will never be repeated, that it never will ever be this bad again as what's going to come in the Great Tribulation. And if it were not, the next verse that Christ quotes, verse 22, this was verse 21, the next verse Christ says, "And except those days should be shortened, except Jesus Christ returns, there should no flesh be saved alive." He's going to come back just at the right moment in order to save all mankind from destroying himself, which could never have happened before 1955, when man developed the hydrogen bomb. And for the first time in the history of man, man is able to annihilate all mankind. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened, cut short, in other words, stopped. Those days will be stopped by the return of Jesus Christ. And if Christ didn't return, as he says, no flesh should be saved alive. Moffat correctly puts the word alive in there after saved, so you can better understand. He's talking about saving mankind from the annihilation, from the genocide of all mankind. Thankfully, that's what Jesus Christ promises he will do. And so the Holocaust of all mankind will not happen because Jesus Christ will stop it. He'll cut it short. Just before mankind would have blown all mankind off the face of the earth. Now, what will lead up to that will be World War III. And World War III, it looks like the machinery is being put into position in order for all of that to come into play now. But we've been talking about a lot of elections happening in the past few days, and even today and tomorrow. There's an election in Egypt. We'll have a news story on that in just a moment. In the Ukraine, they've just elected their new president, and who urges talks with Russia.
The earlier we meet, the earlier we create the agenda, the better it would be for the people of Russia, because Russian people now pay a huge price for the Crimean aventure, the same as Ukrainian one, and we just should be responsible in preparation of this meeting. So I doubt that we will have any real difficulties, and I really hope that the current election, which was really free, really fair, the level of the activity of Ukrainian people and Ukrainian voters are clearly demonstrate that Ukraine are decisive in building up their future. And I think that Russia is our neighbor. And without Russia, it would be much less effective or almost impossible to speak about the security in the whole region, or maybe about the global security.
And friends, I should explain to you that the man you've been seeing on the screen there, who is set to become Ukraine's next president, he's called for talks with Russia as a way to help ease tension between the two countries. But his position as the next president is dependent upon the official results, which are expected today. But exit polls suggest the billionaire confectionery magnate Petro Poroshenko has won the election with about 56% of the vote. And this video you just saw was him speaking at a news conference where he said it would be almost impossible to speak about the security in the whole region without Russia's participation in talks. And Russia says it is open to dialogue with the new president of the Ukraine, as initial results suggested Petro Poroshenko would win its election. But unrest continues in the east with pro-Russian militiamen halting flights at Donetsk airport. Heavy gunfire was reported there with thick black smoke rising from the area. Military aircraft have been seen overhead.
We've been pushed back down the road away from Donetsk airport by the armed separatist groups who appear to be launching a counteroffensive against the Ukrainian authorities, who arrived this morning in large numbers by air to try to retake control of the airport. At about 1 o'clock local time, we saw fighter jets, we saw attack helicopters going in to try to retake the airport from the armed groups who had entered the terminal building this morning. During the morning there were negotiations between the two sides, a standoff to try to resolve this peacefully. But now, really, it has turned into a fight for control of the airport. There was heavy...
Friends, that's Mark Lowen reporting, and I just got a newer update from Mark Lowen on this same story.
Assault from the air met by gunfire from below. Ukrainian jets sent into Donetsk airport, seized by rebels this morning. A surprise attack prompting a long battle for control. Machine guns roaring as we were forced back. There's just been sustained gunfire here as jets and helicopters have flown into Donetsk airport, and it seems as though they've been hit by anti-aircraft fire. Bursts successively in the last few minutes. Soon the impact of the firefight became clear, smoke consuming the airport. Kiev calls it an anti-terror operation against those carving out an independent state in the east. The airport had been blocked off since pro-Russia separatists arrived overnight, demanding Ukrainian forces leave the terminal. The standoff inside was peaceful, negotiations underway, when it seemed Kiev lost patience. Soon the separatists turned up, heavily armed reinforcements taking up position. They had to be quick to dodge the bullets. It seems that a counter-offensive by the rebels may be underway. That truckload of troops has just arrived. The gunfire has started again. Potentially, the separatist groups have come together again and are trying to head back up to the airport. For the man who appears to have won yesterday's presidential election, a stark reminder of what he faces. But Petro Poroshenko vowed a tough line with the insurgents.
The terrorists also don't have any interest to speak with the Ukrainian authorities. They don't have any interest to speak with nobody. The same way like Somalian pirates. In no civilized country of the world, nobody have a negotiation with the terrorists. We are a civilized country.
As the rebels regroup, Kiev stands firm. Ukraine's new leader says peace must prevail here. How far away it still seems. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Donetsk.
Thank you, Mark. Especially thank you for that updated report. And did you notice the new president-elect of the Ukraine has said that Russia is saying one thing and doing another? That is an outstanding observation and a true one. India, friends, has a new prime minister.
Probably it's too early to say about the change of the Russian policy towards Ukraine. We do expect that the Russian position will be not only expressed in the statements, but also some concrete steps will be done in this direction. There was a movement of Russian troops, withdrawal of Russian troops from the Ukrainian-Russian border. At the same time, Russia has launched an air military exercise on the Ukrainian border. Russia is saying one thing and doing another thing at the same time. And we are also very much concerned with the recent attempts from the Russian side to illegally cross Ukrainian border by paramilitary groups. To gain the control of the situation, we have to be more straightforward, and the operation may have to be more straightforward, because there are a lot of people who actually want to have a stability in the region. They want to have a secure, normal life, and they demand it from the central government. And there is no other mean to meet this expectation but to finalize the anti-terrorist operation.
Friends, I'm sorry I got a little bit ahead of myself. This was the foreign minister who explained, well, the foreign minister of the Ukraine explaining that Russia is saying one thing and doing another. Now, there's an electric atmosphere as Narendra Modi was sworn in as India's new prime minister.
It's electric, and it's quite a spectacle as the Prime Minister is taking the oath. It is a significant occasion in India because he is the first Prime Minister who was born after India gained independence in 1947. So he represents the aspirations of a huge number of young people who make up more than 50% of India's population, and many of them have voted for Mr. Modi to power. And now he has a lot of responsibility, as he himself said a little after he won the elections. He said that he would definitely meet the aspirations of young people. He himself is known to be quite well versed with modern technology, with Twitter, and he is very good at tweeting all the time. Nobody quite knows what Mr. Modi thinks, what he has in mind, unless one reads his tweets every day. So as we know that the heads of South Asian states are here, until they were invited, the Indians didn't know that the heads of South Asian states are going to be invited. Mr. Nawaz Sharif is going to be invited. So all that he represents is the aspirations of young people, as well as the people who have voted for him as a massive mandate.
Friends, this next video will give you a little bit of an idea of the industry in India. They have a car they produced for a long time that is called the Ambassador. And it was a vehicle that for decades symbolized the country's political class, but they're closing their plant because of some problems there.
They're easily one of India's most recognizable cars. The Ambassador, with its distinctive look, is a popular choice for taxi drivers in cities like Delhi and Calcutta. But its maker, Hindustan Motors, say work at its plant in Uttarpara has been suspended indefinitely, marking the end of an era spanning 5 decades. This little iconic car, now common sight, was once a status symbol in India.
No one bothers with collars or commas in this unusual city.
Delhi in 1957, cycling very much the main form of transport for the common man. On the left, the Hindustan 10. This was Hindustan Motors' first model to roll out, inspired by the Morris cars of Britain. It evolved into the new, sleeker Ambassador model, and by the late 1950s it became the car of choice for politicians and India's elite. Sales soared in the 80s. This plant turned out tens of thousands of cars, but in recent years there's been a dramatic drop. At its closure, 2,500 workers were producing just 5 cars a day. In a statement, Hindustan Motors said conditions were worsening at the plant, citing very low productivity, growing indiscipline, critical shortage of funds, lack of demand for its core product, and a large accumulation of liabilities. The closure has been a huge blow for the employees, sitting in protest outside the plant. They claim they were not given any legal notice. Some say they hadn't received wages for months. Now all are on indefinite unpaid leave. Hindustan Motors says the suspension will enable the company to restructure its organisation and finances, creating a situation which is conducive to reopening the plant. Though analysts aren't optimistic about Ambassador's future, with people opting for more modern-looking cars. Katerina Moe, BBC News.
Thank you, Katharina. And friends, in this next video report related to Thailand, I'm happy to finally see that the reporter has a story today with the king involved. I say that because we've been watching for days and days, weeks on end, the turmoil and the coup going on in Thailand. And the former end-time apostle of God was a friend, a good friend of the king and queen of Thailand, and we had a special relationship there. And in today's news, Thailand's military leader has received royal endorsement at a ceremony in the capital, Bangkok, after taking power in a coup last week. Army Chief General Chenoka was formally appointed to run the nation at the army headquarters. The 86-year-old monarch, King Bhumibol, did not attend the ceremony. The military seized power in the Southeast Asian nation last week, saying it planned to return stability to Thailand after months of unrest. Jonathan Head got the whole story here. Jonathan?
Thailand is a constitutional monarchy in which even elected governments need an official royal command. It's essentially a protocol, a routine formality, but obviously there's nothing routine about coups. And in Thailand's history, no coup has succeeded without the king at least giving his approval to the government that comes as a result of the coup. They never say the king actually approves of coups, but he's always approved of governments that followed them. There have been coups in the past in Thailand, attempted coups, where the king did not give approval and subtly showed his disapproval, and they all collapsed. And in this case, General Prayut has actually been left waiting a few days for this official royal assent, you might call it. In the past, coup leaders have gone straight to the king. Of course, the king is old now and not in good health. But in the past, they would have gone for an audience with the king fairly quickly to explain why they'd done it and get his approval. In this case, they informed the king, but they've had to wait 5 days until this formal assent came through. Without it, frankly, he would not have been able to claim any legitimacy at all. And of course, I don't think this will make any difference now to the feelings of people who are opposed to this coup. Those feelings run very, very strongly, and they won't be swayed by the fact there's been a royal assent. They're still likely to face, I think, significant protests against the coup in the near future.
Friends, from the coup in Thailand to regional upheavals between Vietnam and China, there is a lot happening in Southeast Asia on the political front. But what does this mean for economies in the long term, especially for developing nations in the region? Charles Davis, an economic advisor in the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, tells Asia Business Report his outlook and views on the future.
ASEAN is a huge market in of itself, and the linkages between the ASEAN economies are growing. We've got the ASEAN Economic Community, of course, developing, and I think the more those linkages are there, the more that actually stands to insulate the region against some of the concerns that you rightly point out with regards to the South China Sea. So I would be hopeful that as much as we might see something of a short-term hit, that integration and perhaps the diversification of the export base beyond just China, the recovery of the Western economies can help to drive growth again in the region next year and beyond.
And according to your report, foreign direct investments into Southeast Asia surpassed China's last year. What does this mean, and how positive is this for the region?
Well, I think it's a good news story for Southeast Asia, and I think it's driven, again, by some of the fundamentals, the fact that we've got a growing working age population in Southeast Asia, growing well-educated populations. There is, in the ICW Economic Insight Report, we do point out that there are still challenges, we think, in the higher education sector, but a lot of the basic education standards are pretty strong, and even some of the top-performing economies in the region match up closely to the US on the levels of basic schooling. So, you know, there is an extent to which it's very attractive to foreign investors, and actually perhaps more so than China, given that the demographics in China are now really working against them. They're swimming against the tide effectively because the working age population, of course, is starting to shrink. And it's an ageing population in China. Of course, there's still a big growth story there. Consumption's gradually shifting from investment to consumption. But we are seeing growth slow in China, and we are seeing some worries about the size of the shadow banking sector and some of the challenges in the financial sector more generally.
Okay, we're always interested in stories on growth in Asia, because a 200 million man army is going to come forth at the end time, and where else is it going to come from? Perhaps but there. Friends, we're going a little bit longer tonight because there are a lot of elections going on around the world. Millions of voters are casting ballots across Egypt to choose a new president there. Sally Nabil reports from one of the polling stations on the elections today and tomorrow in Egypt.
We are here in one of the polling stations in Alexandria, the second largest city in Egypt. As soon as the voter walks into this polling station, he has to make sure that his name and his ID card is registered here. After that, he picks the voting card and he goes here where he picks one of the two candidates running in these elections. After that, he comes out and he casts his vote in this plastic box. Finally, he dips his finger in this ink, which is a procedure to avoid the duplication of the voting. Here in Alexandria, we have 3 million eligible voters. The Egyptian media, in fact, have been campaigning heavily in the past days, asking the people to go out and vote. And some analysts believe that the importance of these elections does not only lie in the final results, but also in the turnout, because it simply shows how many people believe in the credibility of this voting process.
Friends, the recent global economic crisis and its resulting austerity measures was a familiar experience for Estonia. Well, this will be our last story for tonight in our extended newscast from today. But Estonia, which suffered similar policies after leaving the communist bloc, austerity policies, the break with the Soviet Union in the aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall was referred to as the Singing Revolution and saw the introduction of capitalism with an initial boom and subsequent bust. The economy shrank by nearly 20% and public sector salaries fell by 10%, but unlike in today's Europe, there was very little dissent in Estonia. Tanya Beckett reports.
Estonia's operatic depiction of the agony of austerity as the country fights back after the financial crisis of 2008. For Estonians, enduring hardship is a familiar story.
In Soviet times, we had no money, and even if you had money, you wouldn't have anything to do with it, because there was nothing available anyway.
The discussion about the stimulus, austerity, and this crisis actually has a lot to do with the fact that Estonians could get through it because they had gotten through it much worse before.
Estonia's break from communism was called the Singing Revolution. It was a path to freedom paved with music. There was also a spectacular joining of hands which started here in Tallinn and extended across the Baltic neighbours, Lithuania and Latvia. But it wasn't long before Estonians realised they would also need other hands to hold. Mart Laar was Prime Minister at the time of the transition. He was just 32.
You see, we were so young. And Prince, when you are young, you are not afraid of anything. So you do the things which in normal situation are not possible.
Within a few short years, Estonia's economy had left its Soviet past behind. But then came the most recent blow, the financial crisis of 2008. Estonia was hit hard and saw its wealth shrink by almost a fifth.
Any change in the surrounding economic system affects us quite badly. I think we have learned a bit from the financial crisis in the sense of trying to come up with better policies to counteract some of the negative aspects of growth. So hopefully next crisis will be less drastic for Estonia than the last one was.
And tensions are on the rise again. The troubles in Ukraine cast a long shadow over Estonia. About a quarter of its population is Russian. In struggling to close one difficult chapter, Estonians are reluctant to be forced to open another. Tanya Beckett, BBC News, Tallinn.
Thank you, Tanya. And friends, since today is Memorial Day, since we're doing a little extended report tonight because of all the election things going on, and again, it being Memorial Day today, let me do one more story to close with, something light. A group of school children in Hungary have broken the world record for the world's tallest tower made of Lego blocks, or Lego bricks. The structure reached a height of 37 meters, that's 120 feet. The old record was held by U.S. students from Dickinson High School in Delaware. Naga Manchetti has the report on this.
School children in Hungary have broken the world record for the world's tallest tower made of Lego bricks. More than 5,000 volunteers built a tower which was more than 37 meters tall. They used hundreds of thousands of plastic blocks. What an achievement.
And friends, that's it for this Monday night Memorial Day report from Nightcast. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again Tuesday night with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is Stephen Lloyd saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.